Hey, what's up, folks? Welcome back to On Texas Football. I'm lifetime Longhorn Rod Babers. Pleased to be joined by fellow lifetime Longhorn, the young prodigy CJ Vogel, here for your game week preview. And this week we're talking about the Kentucky Wildcats for the 9-1 Texas Longhorns. Before we get into that, though, let me thank our sponsor for tonight's game week preview. I want to thank our friends over at MyBookie. Make sure you're in the game with MyBookie. Play any matchup, hundreds of college player props and more. We'll tell you a little bit more about MyBookie, but check out mybookie.ag. We'll tell you more about them in just a second. But CJ, the Kentucky Wildcats are a team, well, let's just be honest here, they're not a good team. The troubling thing is about Kentucky is they play their best football when they play the best teams on their schedule. They're only 4-6. All right, so they don't have a lot of wins, but their best performances, not necessarily wins, best performances are against ranked teams. They played Georgia down to the wire, right? Lost that game 13-12. End up pulling the upset over Ole Miss. Still kind of stupefying how that happened. Now looking the way Ole Miss is playing, I have no idea how that happened. Won that game. Even Vanderbilt, as Longhorn fans know, Vanderbilt's a tough out. They lost to Vanderbilt by 1 touchdown. And that Tennessee game, Tennessee beat them by 10, 28-18. So they've made these some tough games down the stretch. What are your thoughts overall about how challenging the Kentucky Wildcats will be for the Longhorns?
I think if anything that last week taught us about college football and life in the SEC, it's regardless of what you think might happen, it's still SEC caliber opponents that you're facing, right? I think myself included, I was expecting Texas to go in there, throw the ball all over Arkansas and, have Arch Manning in the game by the middle of the third quarter. That obviously wasn't the case, and it needed some kind of heroics to seal that deal out. But Kentucky, very much the same. I think that you look at it and on paper, you scream, okay, Texas should have no issues with this Kentucky football team. And I think that's exactly what Georgia was saying coming into this game. Ole Miss was saying coming into this game. Shoot, Vanderbilt, Tennessee, Auburn. I think all of these teams really expected to come into this game against Kentucky and say, okay, we know what you are. This is how we're going to go about beating you guys, and it just hasn't gone that simple. Real quick, I wanted to go through some of those games, right? Georgia beats Kentucky 13-12. Mm-hmm. Kentucky turns around and beats Ole Miss 20-17. Vanderbilt 20-13 victory over Kentucky. The theme that I'm seeing is low-scoring, gritty football games. Mm-hmm. But the overarching theme here for me is points scored for Kentucky in SEC play. 6 points against South Carolina. 12 points against Georgia, 20 points against Ole Miss, 13 against Vanderbilt, 20 against Florida, 10 against Auburn, and 18 against Tennessee. They don't score many points, Rod, but they make that game muddied down and play their style.
Yep, and they've actually been successful forcing teams to play their style. Now, the teams, they're not good enough to win those games. A lot of times they did beat Ole Miss, but you're right. They have forced teams into playing ugly games, and that's kind of going to be the challenge for Texas. Can Texas force Kentucky to try to play their style and pull away and separate? Or is Kentucky going to make Texas play an ugly football game and have to win an ugly football game? I wouldn't mind that. I'm at the late, great Al Davis stage of the season. Just win, baby. But as you pointed out several times, CJ, those style points count. And the committee has stated several times the way teams look down the stretch does make a difference. But if you keep winning, you don't have to even discuss that. That wouldn't even be a point of contention for the Longhorns at all. All right, before we move on to the previews and dive deep into it, we'll talk Kentucky's defense first, then jump to the Kentucky offense. Less to explore there. But let's thank our sponsor, MyBookie, and tell you a lot about what they got going on. With all the excitement of this season, make sure you're in the game with MyBookie. Bet any matchup, hundreds of college player props and more. Take advantage of weekly risk-free bets. The best part is you can do it all anytime, anywhere you want to, straight from your phone. Visit mybookie.ag and use the promo code ONTexas to get started. It's really easy and really simple. MyBookie's 10-year anniversary is being celebrated this year, and they're rolling out the red carpet for each and every one of you. You can bet big and bet confidently with risk-free Thursdays. If your boosted bet doesn't hit, you'll get your money back weekly. No sweat, win-win bets all season long, folks. And Sign up right now. Use that code on Texas. You see it right there on the screen to cash in on the double deposit bonus. That's right, folks. Double the cash in your account before you even place your first bet. But don't wait. You want to do it right now because it's only available for a limited time only. For those of you who've been betting and winning big with MyBookie for years, they've got something for you as well. A brand new loyalty rewards program in MyBookie Plus. It's simple. The more you play, the more you earn. And as you progress through the tiers, you can unlock exclusive promotions, epic giveaways, and cash back in your account. That's MyBookie Plus. But go check out mybookie.ag. Remember to use the promo code on Texas to get that double deposit bonus. All right, let's start talking about that Kentucky defense because that is obviously the most important element, the secret sauce to Kentucky, forcing you to play that ugly style, ugly brand of football you were talking about there. And they are an impressive group. I mean, look at scoring defense. They're top 25 in scoring defense. If you look at pass defense, they're top 35 pass defense, total defense, top 30 in total defense. Actually, they're in the red zone. Their touchdown percentage defense in the red zone is actually really stellar. Top 15 there as well. This is a defensive unit with some NFL players at every level of that defense, starting on the D-line with a guy like Deion Walker, who's supposed to be a first or a second round pick.
Yeah, I think it all starts with Deion Walker, right? And for folks that were at SEC Media Days and saw him walk into the room, he was as impressively built as any athlete that was there in Dallas for those 4 days of media interviews. And his play is translated, right? That's a first-round defensive lineman walking through the hallways down in Dallas, and he's carried his play over. I think, again, you have to be aware of where big number 0 is on the field at all times. And what that does for Kentucky, it kind of eases up some of those matchups on the outside for guys like J.J. Weaver, who has 4 sacks and 20 pressures on the year, a guy that they love to move around. Octavius Oxendine, another guy that they love to move off the edge room. And then Trevon Rabika. Listen, they got 3 guys that can get after the passer on that front 7. I think a lot of that and Rod, correct me if I'm wrong, but for folks that love the NBA and basketball, you hear a lot about Steph Curry and kind of his gravity, right? When he's on the floor, you got to know where Steph Curry is, which means you might have a Klay Thompson open in the corner. You might now have a Buddy Hield open somewhere on the wing. That's exactly what it is like for the Kentucky defense in my eyes. Teams are so focused on where Deion Walker is that these other edge rushers now get one-on-ones. Now they get to come across and chip and help create for Deion Walker in themselves, and it just makes life a whole lot difficult for that offensive line and opposing quarterback.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I also like the linebacker. I believe it's Dumas Johnson, the transfer from Georgia. He's having a hell of a season for him, too. I believe at this point he's their leading tackler right now on the team. He's a really good player. They use him also in some situations where they let him get in on the pass rush as well, blitzing from the second level. So I like their defensive front. They haven't had Maxwell Hairston for the later part of the season here because he was dealing with an injury. But the pass defense hasn't fallen off that much with him out. They're still a pretty stout pass defense. So I'm with you. I think, listen, we know that Kentucky and obviously Mark Stoops, he's a defensive-minded guy. He's going to watch that game plan Arkansas had. Defensive-minded coaches, they kind of speak the same language. Remember that stretch, the rough stretch of games Texas went through? When they had Oklahoma and then they had Kirby Smart in Georgia and then they had Vanderbilt Clark Lee. That was a stretch of defensive-minded coaches they had to face, the Texas had to face. And now it's a second stretch of those at the end of the season because you'll have Stoops and you'll have Elko after that with that stretch of games. And I guarantee it's going to be a lot pulled from that Arkansas game plan. And I think you agree with this, CJ. They'd almost be foolish not to use some of those 3 high concepts against Texas. And I think you will see a little bit of it mixed in. I don't know if they're going to do it exclusively like Arkansas did, but I think you'll get it mixed in, especially if they can get Texas in some third and long situations.
And what's going to help them in that instance is exactly what we just talked about, Rod. You're going to have 3, 4, maybe 5 guys that can get after the quarterback. Yep. So if you want to move to a 3-down defensive lineman look and say, hey, you know what? Instead of having an extra 3 tech or a 5 tech on the field, we're going to throw back another safety and make life very difficult for you vertically down the field because we know that we're going to have pass rushing success with these 3 defensive linemen. Arkansas had some success, right? They had 3 sacks on 3rd downs early in that game against the Longhorns a week ago. Landon Jackson was an issue. But more than that, now you got a whole defensive line that you got to be wary of. Plus,
That's right.
Jamon Dumas-Johnson, who you just mentioned, has 4 sacks of his own, and they love to bring off from the second level. So it's going to be a long day for the Texas Longhorns, and it'll be a good test going into College Station a week from now. To be able to sit there and say, all right, we saw a lot of NFL talent in that front 7. Let's see if we can carry over that success real quick as well. Rod, before we move on, there's one other facet of Kentucky that I think is really fascinating when it comes to their makeup defensively. They don't let teams get out to early starts, and you mentioned Coach Stoops, a really strong defensive mind. Those game plans come to play, right? And I was going through the numbers against SEC opponents so far this year, Rod.
Okay.
No SEC opponent has scored double digits in the first quarter of any game against Kentucky. Now, that might just be the complementary aspect of having a run-first approach. Could be. But more than anything, only 3 teams in SEC play have scored 7 points on them this year. 2 have been shut out. 1 have scored or 2 others have scored 3. So, listen, they're averaging 3 points or 3.7 points per first quarter allowed in SEC play. They're averaging 2.7 points per game allowed in the first quarter overall, which is good for 15th in the country. Texas at 1.7 points per game allowed in the first quarter. That ranks 7th. So low-scoring game to start, I would assume.
Yeah, that's good. See, that's good money. That's a good nugget right there because that's how they start. We know Texas' start has been key into them separating and blowing teams out. When Texas gets off to a slow start, usually, that means the game ends up being a bit of a competitive street fight later on in the game. That's a great point right there. We'll see if Texas can buck that trend and score a lot of points in the first quarter to start separating early. Let's jump to the other side of the ball and talk about that Texas defense versus the Kentucky offense. And the Kentucky offense is, what's the word? Best word I can do it without disrespect. Is it pedestrian? That's kind of the best word I can throw out there without being disrespectful to them. CJ, this is an offense that's been struggling all season long. They have certain elements that scare you, right? There are some guys can we just say that there's some guys on the Kentucky offense that when you watch them, they just scare you. Barron Brown is one, right? Brown scares you. Wilcox, Jamarian Wilcox is a young guy. He's a freshman, but man, he's electric when he gets the ball in his hands. This is a guy, I think he's actually right now averaging damn near 7 yards per rush. He is. But he's a freshman. They use him in certain very boutique ways, but he's an electric guy. Barron Brown is one of the fastest college football players in the country at wide receiver. He's their second leading receiver. They got some weapons. They just haven't been able to maximize them yet.
Yeah, and I think the writing was on the wall for Kentucky coming into the season, right? In the spring, they get the big quarterback transfer, former 5-star Brock Vandegrift comes over from Georgia, and you're sitting there thinking, okay, Kentucky, we know what they have, right? A good defense, normally a really strong running game. Now they got a 5-star quarterback to come in, Rod, and be the savior, maybe elevate them to the next level in the SEC conference. And, well, soon we found out right after quarterback wasn't who they really thought was going to be the case because they go out right away and add Gavin Wimsatt, the starting quarterback from Rutgers, to come in and compete. And, well, it's still Brock Vandegrift behind center, but it's not necessarily been the results that was expected when he arrived on campus. But to your point, I wanted to mention this because, yes, the Kentucky passing game has not been good this year, but there are 3 guys, I would argue, that are really talented in that that receiving corps right now. Dane Key, out of nowhere almost in my eyes, has come in and with 80 targets on the year, more than double that of the second leading wide receiver on the team, has been the guy that they've relied on more than anybody. And that's with Barron Brown being one of the most explosive, dynamic wide receivers in the country. And then Jay Macklin, another transfer from North Texas. Listen, that was a 1,000-yard wide receiver at North Texas a year ago. He transferred over to Kentucky, and I was thinking, okay, they got a 2-man duo right now at wide receiver, right? That's going to be Barron Brown. That's going to be Jamori Macklin. Dane Key is the guy to keep an eye on, 686 receiving yards, more than double that of Barron Brown, who's second on the team. It's going to be interesting because if they can get a passing game going, and they haven't been able to all year, and Texas necessarily hasn't allowed that all year, that's really how this game will remain close if Texas starts to score early.
Yeah, it's a great point about Dane Key. Everybody assumed other guys would be the leading. Barron Brown would be a leading receiver, and you're right about Macklin, but there's no question Dane Key has stepped up, and he's the guy. They want to run the passing game through him. The running game, Demi Sumo is the leading rusher in terms of rush attempts for them. But like I said, Jamarian Wilcox is a hell of a change of pace. And I think, honestly, he's the one that worries me the most because he's got game-breaking ability. Some guys move the chains. That's sumo, but some guys change the game. That's Wilcox. He can be a game changer for you. But I don't know in the passing game if Vandergrift will be able to take advantage of any possible separation receivers can get. He's completing less than 60% of his passes, got 9 touchdowns, 7 interceptions on the season. This is an opportunistic defense they're going up against that could be problematic if he doesn't take care of the football versus Texas. All right, great breakdown there, CJ, as usual. Thank you very much for the nuggets of wisdom. Let's thank our sponsors one more time, our friends over at MyBookie, before we end our game week preview. Thank you to MyBookie. Go to mybookie.ag. Remember, use the promo code ONTexas. Take advantage of that double deposit bonus. You know what that means, folks. That means you can get cash in your account, double the cash in your account before you even place your first bet. Remember to use the code ONTexas is how you do that. And don't forget about MyBookie Plus, their loyalty rewards program for all you MyBookie bettors who have been betting with MyBookie and winning with MyBookie for years. All right, thanks to CJ, appreciate you. Thanks to our friends over at MyBookie as well, and thanks to you guys out there for watching and for listening. And until next time, hook 'em horns.